Now that our main functionality is done, let's talk more about this second 90% you've heard me mention a few times. Now, the first 90% is what we just spent the whole course doing, and the project feels like done. But to take this to a real full production product, you got a long way to go. The major example of the second 90% is to have proper, thorough error handling. Now, we did a lot of error handling, but remember I said, we just kind of gave broad, generic errors. Remember I said, oh, you could handle all the 8 different error cases. Maybe you're making a network call and you can get back all the different HTTP statuses, right? Status 200, 404, page not found, 500, server error, right? There's all those HTTP statuses that you can give specific errors for. So that thorough error handling takes a long time. It's very tedious. That's why we kept it broad in the course, and we're not going to go down that tedious route. I'm just giving you an example because I don't think you want to watch 10 hours of error handling. But in reality, when you're making a thorough, production product, that kind of stuff has to get done. And that falls into this second 90%. And then there's all kinds of edge cases that you can think of, right? We talked about all the text validation on our profile screen. I mentioned regular expressions to make sure you're checking for everything. We didn't go down that thread. Basically, all those threads that I say, hey, I had to draw the line somewhere, we couldn't go down all these threads. Those are all the threads you go down in the second 90%. And we didn't really touch on, how do you handle a very, very poor internet connection or no internet connection at all? Do we implement an offline mode, right? You can see how this list slowly starts to grow. And that's kind of the point, is it's not one thing that'll kill you. One thing on their own doesn't look that bad. Oh, maybe that'll take a day. It's just all these little things add up to that second 90%. And then there's polished stuff, right? Do you want to add nice, fun, subtle little animations? Do you want to add better empty states, right? A lot of our empty states were just, nobody's here, nobody's checked in. Maybe you do want to have a nice little illustration or a drawing. Maybe it's even animated, right? You can go pretty far with that kind of stuff. Then you got to make it look good on all different screen sizes. What about the iPad? Do you want to do that? What about all the accessibility stuff? Dynamic type support, right? Again, there's so much in this second 90% that even though the product feels done, so much more to go. And that's the whole point. And I'm going to put my YouTube video that I did on this topic at the end of this video to watch. But the main point is a lot of new developers, when they hit this second 90%, it's very discouraging. I know it discouraged the hell out of me because I thought I was done. I was like, oh man, I'm so close to being done, maybe another couple days and I can launch this thing. And then you start going down all these paths and you're like, holy shit, I have so much more to do. And it's discouraging. So I want to be upfront about the second 90%, teach you about it. So when you go off and build your own products, you can expect it. It's coming. And if you know it's coming, your expectations are set well, it's not going to discourage you as much. It still sucks to do. Don't get me wrong. So that's the gist of the second 90%. And again, in this course, we're not going to go down all those threads 100% because like I said, that would be another 100 videos. But we are going to touch on some of the big stuff just to give you an example, give you a taste of it. But again, I want you to know there's a lot more to this second 90% that we're just not going to have the time to do, but at least it exists. So here's my YouTube video on this topic. It does repeat some of the stuff I say, but I dive deeper into a lot of different things. So check it out and enjoy the huge beard I had back then. What's going on, everybody? Today we're going to talk about a software development concept that really only sinks in once you have experience. And there's not really an official name for it, but I call it the 90-90 rule. Now again, this will usually only bite you in the ass as a new developer when you're building your first app or your first product. And that is the concept that there's the first 90% of the app, and then there's the second 90% of the app. And you're thinking, wait a minute, 180%? What are you talking about? What the hell does that mean? We'll talk about it. So here's typically what happens when you're building your first app, first website, first software development product. You're going to build that core functionality first. So when you have all that done, the app is going to feel like it's 90% done. You're going to be able to play with it, do all the main functions that you want, and it's going to be like, wow, this app's ready to go almost. Just, it's 90% done. Just got a little bit of polish to go, and we're done. Ship it. But that's where you'd be wrong. You see, that was just the first 90%. And even though it feels almost done, you're really only about halfway done. And that's where the second 90% comes in. And that's all this little stuff where each thing on its own doesn't really seem like that big a deal, but they all add up to a lot of work actually. And that's why when you get to that first 90% point, you're really only halfway done. And the reason I want to talk about this and bring this up to you newer developers is that it can be very discouraging. I remember building my first app. It was discouraging as hell. It was frustrating. I felt like I was almost done. This thing's ready to ship. And then it's just all this little stuff just keeps piling up. And we're going to talk about that little stuff later. But I wanted to share this concept so you know this going into building your first app, or if you're already midway through, you can kind of expect this. Because what happens is, again, once you get that first 90% done, you think you're done. or close to being done, and then you just get smacked in the face by the second 90%. So I'm trying to forewarn you and let you know that second 90% is coming. So let's talk about that second 90% that's about to smack you in the face, and we'll talk about some of the things that it can typically be. Now, if you're here watching this and you're not an iOS developer, that's what my channel focuses on, is Swift and iOS development. So these examples are going to be from that perspective, but you can apply it, to your own process. But let's talk about edge cases here. Now, this can be anything from how does your app perform when there's no internet or very, very poor internet connection, right? You got to handle all of that. What happens when a user gets a brand new device? Are you relying on storing some stuff in user defaults too much? Or if they delete the app and reinstall, is your app still going to behave properly? Or things like what happens when a user kills your app in the middle of a key function that's going on? Or is your app going to be able to recover from that gracefully, or is it just going to be in this weird state that's broken, right? So you see, basically what really happens here is you think you know how users are going to use your app, but really once it gets out in the wild and users start banging on your app, they're going to do things you could never even think of. So all these edge cases, you have to try and think of that in advance. And like I said, these small things really add up and do some time-consuming, fixes. And those were just some common general edge cases. These edge cases are going to be very specific to your app, but they really add up. Next up, let's talk about some really robust error handling, right? When we're initially developing our app, how common is it to be like, handle the errors, and you'll do that later, right? Because it's tedious work, because you got to handle all the various different error messages and fail gracefully like we do in our apps, right? You don't want to just have an abrupt error that's not descriptive. You want to let the user know what's going on so they know what happened with your app and so forth. So building out really robust error handling is tedious and time consuming, but it has to be done. And again, it's one of those things where on its own, it may not seem that bad, but when you pile on error handling with edge cases and all the other stuff we're going to talk about, again, you can start to see where this second 90%, again, it adds up. And then you have things like just overall analytics, right? You want to see how many times users are going to a specific screen or how many times they're doing a specific function. So now you gotta, once the app's done, you gotta put in your analytics so you can track everything. And then there's accessibility features for people with disabilities. And this is often overlooked by many developers, but it's so important. I've covered it on Swift News a few times. Just the percentage of people that use the iPhone that actually use these accessibility features. It's a big deal, and if you're ignoring accessibility, stop. You shouldn't. And then you got testing your UI on all the many device sizes here in the iOS ecosystem. Now, don't get me wrong, if you're using auto layout correctly, that's going to handle 80 to 90% of the work in my opinion. However, making your app look beautiful on the iPhone XS Max, yes I said XS, and then down to the iPhone SE size, like that's a massive difference. And like I said, a lot of times auto layout will do most of the work, but most of the time you got to tweak that final 10% to get it really looking perfect on both screens. And like I said in the beginning, when you're building the original functionality of your app going through the first time, you're not worried about making it look great on all screen sizes while you're still building it and trying to get it to work, right? You kind of save that for the end once you're ready for the polish. But again, now we're just piling more stuff up onto that second 90% that we're talking about. And then there's the good old refactoring. How many times have you built a feature, refactor this later when you have more time, right? Because oftentimes in software development, you just hack it together to get it working, and then you clean it up later. Well, sometimes, depending on any deadlines, you might not get to that cleanup, which is, don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating that. That's bad. Always try to refactor and make your code good before moving on to the next thing. But I know shit happens, and sometimes you don't have the chance to do that. But eventually you got to pay the piper, and again, during the second 90% is usually when you clean up a lot of technical debt and do a lot of refactoring. And then there's testing. Depending on your philosophy, if you're doing test-driven development, then you're doing the test first, so this won't be in the second 90%. But most people don't do test-driven development. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying the majority of developers don't do that. So now your unit tests come in after you've built the app. So again, more stuff in the second 90%. So those were just some examples of what can be in that second 90% that just comes in and smack you in the face. But I wanted to share this because the main takeaway I want you to take away from this video is know that second 90% is coming, and don't be blindsided by it, and don't get discouraged. If you're building your very first app, or if you're a junior developer, I want to get you in the right mindset to expect a whole lot of work to still be needed to be done when you think you're almost done. Again, there's the first 90% and the second 90%. So that's what I got for you today. If you like what I'm doing here, consider subscribing. I put out Swift News every Monday and then a tutorial or two throughout the week. We'll see you in the next one.